Section 11, Heights Theater House Management, April 2013 to November 2014. Age 23 to 24, $7.25 hourly. Chapter title, Liberal Arts Degree. I can't remember why I decided to apply, but I knew I liked movies and popcorn more than the average person. I had originally gone in to ask about renting the theater for premiering a film my friend and I had been working on, which is discussed at the back of the book, and figured I should submit an application because I was unemployed and this was such a cool place. It wasn't a typical movie theater. It had one screen, 4 giant chandeliers, beautiful red carpet and curtains, and a functional pipe organ at the center of it all. There was always a rich smell of fabric, wood, and butter that I could not get enough of. The theater showed new films, but the owner Tom Letness was very picky about which ones. He was also known to show older films on his 35mm projector. His most admirable practice was never subjecting audiences to more than one commercial before the previews. I respected that more and more as the years passed. I showed up 10 minutes late for my interview, which was embarrassing, but I think Tom saw my honest intentions. He took me on at minimum wage with the promise that it would increase after the first month. Tom was an eccentric man, and I would soon find out that he only seemed to hire curious kids. I'm not sure what that said about me, but my circumstances were certainly abnormal. I was definitely too old to be working at a movie theater. I told myself that I went to an arts high school and got my college degree in photography, so I wanted to make my craft my career, but I needed to work a normal job for money until that happened. This job covered both of those bases. In retrospect, I think it might have been more accurate to say I didn't understand the value of a dollar, and that I just wanted to hang out with friends, and that I had a weak grasp on what I wanted for my future. I believe I had the ethics and vision for the right kind of work, but remained unmotivated and directionless in the face of the jobs I'd worked so far. Maybe this would be the turning point. Like the Guthrie Theater, I was management in that I managed the house. I didn't wield any specific powers that placed me above other employees, though. The job itself was very easy. I'd show up and call Tom to let me in, and then I'd start preparing the popcorn machine, which was from the 40s. I used to tell customers that it had popped for the war effort, but nobody ever laughed at that joke. Then I'd open all the doors and wait. The idea was to maximize concession sales during this brief period by being as efficient as possible. Upselling was never explicitly encouraged, but I'm sure this was because Tom wanted us to focus on order accuracy and speed more than anything else. The doors would be closed 20 minutes after the movie had started, and theater rules stated no one would be let in late so as not to disturb the show. From then until the movie was over, I would clean the counters, lobby, and bathrooms, as well as specific rotating cleaning jobs like window sills, scrubbing, furniture detailing. I believe I cleaned more than anyone else, but that was because I didn't bring a book and thought sitting around was too boring. I usually went next door to the Dairy Queen and got a miniature Oreo Blizzard as a snack. It took me a few months of doing this before I thought to start chatting with these guys and tipping them, after which they started giving me a lot more Oreos and blending them for longer. We were also allowed to have as much popcorn as we wanted, and our dispenser melted real butterfat. I considered this to be a high point in my snacking life. The popcorn machine had to be disassembled and cleaned, which was a pain in the ass, because all the parts were too big to fit in the sink and were covered in grease and kernels. As the movie neared its end, as determined by audio cues heard through the doors and by peeking through these small windows into the theater, I would run to open both sides for exiting traffic. My last task would be cleaning any spills between seats, and this is where I paid my penance for all the times that I had dropped popcorn or left trash behind in the past. People were disgusting. Despite all its charm, a historic single-screen theater with a penchant for classic and art films couldn't survive the poor economy without some sort of assistance. The trick was that Tom owned the Dairy Queen, and his home was the second story of the theater. He could come down to help with rush periods at any moment, and when it was too nice out to see a movie, folks would get ice cream. I considered this to be a stroke of business genius, but I imagine it took every moment of his life to keep up with all that work. Another masterful management trick was having a camera trained on the front lobby. The live feed was upstairs in his home, so unless you knew for certain that he was out running chores, he could be watching at any time. Anxiety about the boss's electric eye kept the already obedient staff even more aware of their actions. I had proven myself quickly, and was given the opportunity to run the sound and light board for special events. 2 clients stand out in particular, one good and one bad. The good experience was working with this group called Found Footage Festival, which were 2 guys that showed a series of ridiculous videos found at garage sales and thrift stores, etc. My boss warned me that I had to pay attention, because people in the past would be laughing so hard, they'd forget that they were working and not bring the lights and mic up between clips. I loved the show, and I loved the fact that I was getting paid to watch it. I didn't miss a single cue either. The bad experience was with an actor named Crispin Glover, most famous for being Marty McFly's dad in Back to the Future, and the Crazy Man in the Charlie's Angels reboot. He was touring with a series of books and films that he had made on his own dime, which you could only describe as dark art house. He did a reading/showing for 2 nights in a row, during which I'd control the gain of his wireless microphone and lower the lights for the film. Because of all the metal in the building, we had a lot of interference with the mic, which would make these horrible screeching sounds. Everyone in the audience would grimace each time, so I'd lower the gain until the sounds quit, but then people in the back would start yelling that they couldn't hear him. So I had to follow the inflections of his speech and adjust back and forth between too quiet and too jarring, with no reasonable middle ground at all. By the end of his reading, I was covered in sweat and full of nerves. Glover seemed mad, but my boss had a talk with him, and my heart sank when I was told he was going to continue using the wireless mic for a second night. I made a point of approaching him before the show and getting advice on how he wanted me to camp on the sound. Things were going as well as they could when he suddenly stopped the reading. "Excuse me. The employee up there, yes, there's somebody in the audience recording." I looked up from the board, not sure if it was me he wanted. "I need you to come down here and confiscate this man's phone before I continue." I hesitantly stood up and started walking towards the stage. "There, he's right there." He pointed near the front at the packed seats. I scanned the area as the entire theater stared at me. I saw no recording device. Nobody was owning up. After 15 seconds of fruitless searching, I put my hands up. "Somebody help me here. I can't find him." Glover stomped off stage, and when he reached me, he pointed a finger at a young man and demanded he step out of the audience. He led him up on stage and in front of everyone made him go through his phone and delete everything related to the show. His mic was picking up their mumblings. "Yep, delete that one. Get that one too. Is that all of it? Scroll to the next page. I need to see everything you have to be sure." I had already walked back up to the board and watched from the back as everyone in the theater silently waited. Finally he let him go, and the young man walked right past his seat and left. I didn't blame him. Glover faced the stage and said in his wormy little Werner Herzog voice, "This is why I said no recording at the beginning of the show. I do not want this out on the internet. It is stealing from me." I had to hand it to him. I appreciated his commitment and loathed people who used their phones during live shows. It was a bold move, one which had to be explained in detail to my boss at the end of the night when he asked me about the disturbance. Just for kicks, I ended up searching for pirated versions of his work on the internet a few days later and found a nice version. Maybe he had just discovered this existed and was still mad about it? I really enjoyed working at the theater. I frequently stopped to admire the building and its hand-built eccentricity. Occasionally, you could hear Tom playing his old records through the ceiling, beautiful opera songs. Stories were told by the other employees about how gorgeous his house was, but I had never seen it. When he went on vacation and I was working alone, I'd sit in the theater after hours and take it all in. You could explore behind the curtain, look at the pipes for the organ in the walls, or go sit in the projector room while the show was running. I'd memorize lines and see each film in small sections by peeking through the window between chores. Depending on how long the film was determined how long I had to get my tasks finished. Short films are great because they kept you on your feet, but the longer ones, pushing 3 hours, could really drag. My shift was the evening showing, typically from 6 to 10 p.m., 2 to 4 days a week. As you can imagine, my paychecks were pretty small, but I had some money saved from previous jobs. I requested additional hours pretty frequently as well, but Tom needed to save some for the rest of his workers. There were times I questioned my employment choice. Specifically when I was wiping down Dairy Queen tables outside, and an older man told me this was the perfect first job to have. As previously mentioned, the staff was unique. Dale was the only one that I would call a friend. He was a handsome young coder who sailed and enjoyed movies. He also worked at another small theater and maintained a website of local films. His social media was updated with well-thought-out reviews of new movies he had seen. He was rich with character, driven to create things, and wore his passion on his sleeve for all to see. You could have a conversation with real substance, and we did every time we worked together. At one point, our boss had to come down and tell us to quit talking so loud because patrons could hear us through the wall. After I left that job, I would proceed to bump into Dale at special movie screenings around town. He even had the good nature to come to my own movie premiere, although I don't think he liked it. Another man that all called Daryl was the walking stereotype of short, bald, and upset with life. George Costanza was funny, but Daryl was simply depressing. His mood was eternally foul, and his eyes had a deep sadness to them. I would ask all the standard getting-to-know-someone questions, but he only ever had a few words in response, followed by stony silence staring at the ground. I took over for his shift one day when he seemed especially down. He walked out as I walked in. He turned south down Central Avenue instead of north like he usually did. I don't know why I noticed this. An hour later, I found a plastic bag under the counter with all of his belongings. There was a flash drive, a folded piece of paper, his wallet, phone, and keys. Suddenly an ambulance flew south down Central Avenue with its sirens blaring. I was officially spooked. I called Tom on the wall phone and explained my findings as rationally as I could, letting him make his own conclusions. He came right down and inspected the bag. He didn't say much, but seemed to be considering the situation as seriously as I had. The only insight he gave me was that this had happened before. I never saw Daryl again after that. The Heights Theater did have a manager, and his name was Greg Sandy. Greg was a tall, heavy-set, frumpy-looking man-child with a long, drooping face and sour personality. He was the one who trained me in for my first week, and who was usually around as a boss type when the theater was busy or Tom was indisposed for more official-type duties like starting the projector and locking up at night. Because I was forced to spend so much time with this guy, I always tried my best to be enjoyable company. I would listen to him complain endlessly about each and every customer, and humor his ego by soliciting advice about management and his own history at the Heights. We eventually found common interest in electronic music when I told him that I had a collection of Pet Shop Boy tape cassettes from high school. This got him enormously excited. He told me he was an aspiring DJ and would start bringing me a bunch of burned CD mixes, which were objectively very poor in quality. He told me he wanted to build a custom DJ booth from Legos, which would shoot bubbles and be covered in flashing lights. Every evening, he told me his mommy was coming to pick him up as we waited out front. This guy was older than me, and beginning to creep me out in a way I couldn't quite understand yet. Tom went on vacation for a week, leaving Greg in charge. Every evening, it was just Greg and I. He would sit on the counter behind me, staring at the back of my neck while I sold tickets and snacks. I could hear him chewing through his mix of popcorn and M&Ms, occasionally saddling up next to me with a greasy mouth to say how much he hated people in general. Greg's hygiene rapidly declined. He started wearing stretched-out t-shirts which were stained and full of holes. He would often bend over, and you could see his ratty underwear riding up his cargo shorts. One evening, he said I had to mop every aisle after closing. He disappeared, while I started working from the back seating towards the front. I was certain Tom probably wanted the both of us to be working together on the task, but I was so sick of talking to Greg that if he didn't want to be present, I wasn't going to argue. All of a sudden, the theater sound system sprung to life playing Pet Shop Boys. A minute later, Greg emerged at the theater doors with an entire fistful of lollipops. He sat down in a chair, waved his hand at me in a keep working motion, and began to unwrap his treats one by one. His eyes were lasers cutting into me. The mopping required me to bend over at the hips, and suddenly I became very conscious of my ass sticking out as Greg slurped on his suckers. The next day's shift was a slow one. It was an unpopular movie on a weekday, so I knew that there was going to be a lot of Greg time. We sold maybe 20 tickets, and I got to work on cleaning the lobby. Greg hadn't said much to me at all yet, but suddenly he launched into an unsolicited rant. He began describing several occasions in which he paid a woman to have sex with him. I nodded my head in surprise. I didn't need to hear it. but I was bored and this was some weird shit. In chronological order, he explained how attractive each woman was and how he had tracked them down. According to Greg, you could simply go through the back pages of a local paper and then follow up with a review website which would qualify what you were looking for. He got out his cell phone and showed me pictures of him with each woman from a selfie angle, combined with rich descriptions of how their sex went and how much it cost. I continued prompting him for more information. I couldn't believe the depths of this man's depravity. He must have trusted me, or at least thought I was pretty cool for all of this information to be dumped on someone who was technically working for him. I thought it was a nice touch when he explained that you didn't even need to have sex with them. They would cuddle with you too. Once Tom had returned from vacation, I enacted a plan. I started telling Greg that with his years of experience, he could probably get any management job he wanted and make a bunch more money, while simultaneously telling Tom that I would be willing to run the theater for a slight pay increase. Both parties objected, and life went on as usual until one fateful shift when Greg was helping me with concessions. We would talk about computers between customers when he let it slip that his own computer had been confiscated by the police. My stomach dropped, but like watching a train wreck, I couldn't help but ask why. He dropped the subject and remained quiet. We continued lightly chatting about other things. As I was ringing up a customer's order, Greg slid his phone over to me with a text composition screen open. I quickly glanced down before the change drawer opened. Underage photos is all it said. I let out a deep and horrible sound came up through my mouth. I closed my eyes. It took me a few seconds to compose myself and tender the correct change to a visibly confused customer. Then I said, "Huh," in Greg's direction and kept working in silence. When the movie started and the front doors were closed, he started explaining himself. This time I really didn't want to hear it, but I had nowhere to go and didn't know how angry to be yet. He explained that he was bisexual and preferred kids around 15. I'll reiterate, this guy was probably close to 30. I ignored him for the rest of the night and started deliberating on how to bring this up to Tom. Our theater employed a lot of younger people, and suddenly I was nervous about their safety. We had literally just hired 2 new employees, a boy and a girl around 16 years old, and it was likely that Greg would be the one training them alone. The next time I saw Tom, I put in a request to train them both. The way the schedule worked out had Greg with the guy and me training the girl. The next week I was working with Greg again, and he started mentioning how cute the new guy was. I wondered if it was legally justifiable to beat him up, but I knew that I couldn't even push his fat ass over, let alone win in a fistfight. My temporary solution was to submit a leave of absence. I would take an indeterminate amount of time off without resigning. Greg fought hard for me to stay, oblivious that he was the reason I was leaving. He told me I was his only friend, and I choked down some vomit. I never found the right way to bring the subject up to Tom. I had no proof, and every complaint I had about Greg in the past had been ignored. Greg was part of the institution. He also ran most of the theater for $10 an hour with unbreakable dedication. Over the next months, I would do a rare shift, cover for someone who called out, or assist with an event. I was continually looking for new jobs during this time, and felt like it was a responsible move to make sure I had something serious lined up before cutting all ties. Reality was a real ball breaker, and although that place proved too weird for me, I would still miss it. So small, so local, so real. A theater truly dedicated to film and the experience of watching it.